The echoes of the dead earth. Earth. The air in the bunker tasted like recycled breath and damp concrete, a stagnant, suffocating soup that had been my entire world for 7 long, agonizing years. Every single inhalation brought the metallic, bitter tang of failing air scrubbers, and the sour, pervasive musk of 60 unwashed survivors, clinging desperately to a pathetic existence beneath the earth. We were the remnants, the forgotten, the buried. I looked at my hands, holding them up against the flickering, harsh glare of the dying fluorescent lights that lined the ceiling like sickly ribs. My hands were clean. They were soft. They were trembling. I was the colony's mascot of inadequacy, while the others, the grizzled scavengers and the hardened hunters, came back to the airlock drenched in the thick, black, tar-like ichor of the creatures we terrifiedly called the Zeeks, boasting of narrow escapes from the fast-moving feral nightmares that had violently reclaimed the surface world. I was merely the man who stirred the soup. I was the man who fixed the radios, twisting dials in the dark, hoping to hear something other than the cosmic microwave background of a dead planet. I was the man who froze in utter paralysis when the perimeter alarms blared. But then, on a Tuesday that felt exactly like any other endless subterranean cycle, I heard her voice. Alejandra. 7 years of brutal, unforgiving static had finally cleared into the sweet, hardened melody of the girl I had lost when the world ended. She was broadcasting on a low, encrypted frequency, stating her coordinates with a cold, mechanical precision. She was 85 miles away, stationed at a heavily fortified coastal colony. In my head, she was still the radiant girl in the yellow sundress, the one who smelled of sweet vanilla and whispered profound secrets in the back of my father's car before the sky caught fire. In my head, I was still the boy who mattered to her. I made my decision in an instant, driven by a foolish, blazing fire I did not know I possessed. I packed a weathered canvas bag, took a heavy wooden crossbow I barely knew how to aim, and I left the safety of the concrete womb. I survived the trek, though it violently stripped away every single ounce of my former self. I walked through ruined, colossal highways choked with rusted metal and the bleached, sun-baked bones of the old world. I met Clyde, a grizzled, cynical veteran missing 2 fingers on his left hand, and Minnow, a fiercely feral girl who spoke mostly in animalistic grunts and possessed the agility of a spider. Together, they relentlessly hammered the softness out of me. They taught me that a Zeke did not care about my feelings, my past, or my grand romantic quest. It only cared about the rhythm of my heartbeat and the warmth of my flesh. Along the way, I met Boy, a massive, scarred stray mastiff mix who became my soul's anchor, walking faithfully by my side through the ash and the blood. I fought. I bled black and red. I grew thick calluses over my blisters and then iron-hard calluses over my calluses. I arrived at the crashing waves of the coast, not as the cowardly cook of Bunker 42, but as a hardened, lethal survivor of the New World. And then I saw her. Chapter 2. The Cold Front. I stood at the massive, rusted iron gates of the coastal colony, the scent of heavy brine and decaying seaweed thick in the air. My breath was hitching in my chest, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Alejandra walked toward me through the heavily armed courtyard. I expected a run, a dramatic leap into my arms, a desperate sob of relief that we had both miraculously made it through the literal end of the world. Instead, she stopped exactly 5 feet away, a chasm of cold air between us. Her eyes did not spark with recognition or joy. Instead, they coldly and clinically appraised me like a piece of salvaged gear, checking for rust, durability, and utility. "Joel?" she asked, her voice entirely flat, utterly devoid of any melodic inflection I had desperately clung to in the dark. You are alive." "I walked 85 miles, Alejandra," I said, my voice thick with raw emotion, stepping forward and reaching out to gently touch her arm. She stepped back instinctively, a micro-expression of absolute disdain crossing her face, as her hand hovered defensively near the serrated hunting knife strapped tightly to her tactical belt. "That was a long way to come for a ghost, Joel," she whispered, looking past me as if I were nothing but a minor inconvenience. The first crack in my heart was not a sharp break. It was a slow, creeping, agonizing frost. Chapter 3. The Dinner of Silence. That night, under the flickering, sickly glow of sodium lanterns, They gave me a seat at the very edge of their massive communal dining table. I tried desperately to bridge the widening gap. I tried to tell her about the suffocating bunker, about the long, terrifying nights hunched over the sparking radio, about how I had miraculously kept her high school picture perfectly preserved in a clear plastic sleeve for 7 brutal years. "We do not really do pictures here," she interrupted abruptly, not even making eye contact as she slid a dented metal bowl of tasteless, gray fungal mash toward me across the rough wood. "We do perimeter checks. We do dangerous loot runs. We survive. The world is not a high school hallway anymore, Joel. You are talking about a person who died the moment the sirens went off." I looked down at the smiling picture burning a hole in my jacket pocket. To me, it was a holy relic of hope. To her, it was just trash, a pathetic anchor to a world she had buried. Chapter 4. The Friend. A man named Cap swaggered into the mess hall, instantly commanding the room. He was incredibly tall, heavily scarred across his jawline, and radiated a casual, toxic authority that I completely lacked. He wore a heavy leather jacket adorned with gruesome Zeke teeth and smelled strongly of fermented grain alcohol, gun oil, and old sweat. He walked right up to our table and put a heavy, incredibly possessive hand on Alejandra's shoulder. She did not flinch. In fact, she visibly relaxed, leaning back into his heavy touch with an intimate familiarity that made my stomach aggressively churn. "This the soft boy from the radio." Cap smirked, looking down his nose at me like I was a repulsive insect that had crawled onto his plate. Alejandra did not even look at me when she answered. "He is an old acquaintance from before." Acquaintance. The cold, sterile word echoed violently in my mind, feeling exactly like a Zeke's rusted, blood-soaked claw slowly dragging down my exposed spine. Chapter 5. The Comparison. Cap pulled up a heavy wooden chair, arrogantly kicking his muddy boots up onto the dining table dangerously close to my bowl. "So, Joel," Cap leaned in, his foul, alcohol-soaked breath washing over my face. "Alejandra says you were a little cooked down in that hole. You ever actually drop a Zeke? Or did you just wait for them to die of absolute boredom while you stirred the magic beans?" Alejandra chuckled softly. It was not a mean laugh, which somehow made it infinitely worse. It was a soft, deeply pitying laugh. "He has a good heart, Cap. Leave him alone. He is just not built for the surface." I sat there in a crushing, agonizing silence. I would have vastly preferred it if she had simply drawn her serrated knife and stabbed me directly in the chest. Chapter 6. The Gift Refused. The next day, the bitter coastal wind was howling off the gray ocean. I had carried a small, meticulously carved wooden bird that I had made with a dull pocket knife during my countless hours in the bunker. It was a symbol of the open sky we used to watch together, lying on the warm hood of my old car. I tried to give it to her when we were finally alone near the towering concrete seawall, away from prying eyes. I held it out, my hands scarred and calloused, offering a literal piece of my bruised soul. "I cannot take this," she said flatly, her arms crossed tight and defensive against her chest, refusing to even let her fingers brush the polished wood. "It is weight. It is clutter. In this world, if you cannot eat it, shoot it, or use it to patch a breached wall, it simply does not exist." She turned on her combat-booted heel and walked away, leaving me standing entirely alone, holding the fragile wooden bird while the freezing salt spray mocked my foolish, enduring romanticism. Chapter 7. The Observation. Later that evening, I stood hidden in the dark, damp, impenetrable shadows of the colony's main porch. I watched her from afar. She was sitting around a roaring, massive bonfire, laughing boisterously with a group of heavily armed, rowdy hunters, throwing back a shot of some foul, homemade liquor. I realized with a sudden, sickening, crystal-clear clarity that I did not recognize her laugh. The pitch was wrong. The joy was hollow, forced, performative. I was deeply, profoundly in love with a memory, and the harsh, cynical, hardened woman sitting in front of me looked at that memory with nothing but profound, utter embarrassment. Chapter 8. The Lecture. "You should not have come," she told me privately later that night, aggressively cornering me near the heavy steel doors of the armory. Her tone was scolding, sharp, like a bitter mother reprimanding a particularly foolish child. "It was selfish of you. You could have died out there, and for what? A stupid high school crush? A pathetic fantasy? It was not a crush to me, I said, my voice cracking under the immense weight of a 7-year, agonizing pilgrimage. It was the only thing that kept me breathing when the air scrubbers failed. Then that is your problem, Joel, not mine. Do not put that heavy burden on me, she snapped viciously, her eyes flashing with genuine, unbridled annoyance. Chapter 9. The Training Ground. Desperate to prove my actual worth, the next morning, I marched down to the makeshift shooting range. I tried to show her the lethal, efficient combat moves Clyde had brutally drilled into my muscle memory. I practiced with my heavy wooden crossbow, effortlessly pulling the 150-pound draw and hitting the dead center of a painted red target 3 times in a row. The heavy, steel-tipped bolts sinking deep into the thick wood with a deeply satisfying thwack. "Not bad," she said casually, walking right past me without breaking her brisk stride or even turning her head fully to acknowledge the feat. Cap hits them from twice that distance, though. And he does it while riding in the back of a moving, bouncing supply truck. Chapter 10. The Request and Realization. I caught her tightly by the arm later that afternoon, unable to take the dismissal anymore. "Alejandra, please, can we just talk? About us? About anything real?" She stopped, heaved a massive, profoundly exhausted sigh, and looked down at her battered digital tactical watch. "I have a critical logistics meeting with the Defense Council in exactly 5 minutes. Can your delicate feelings wait another 7 years?" I slowly let go of her arm. I pointed out over the spiked barricades to a spot I had seen on my treacherous way in, a beautiful, miraculously untouched meadow blooming with vibrant wild bluebonnets. We could go there, just for an hour, just to breathe and remember what it is like to be human. She stared at me, completely deadpan, her face a mask of stone. "I do not need to breathe, Joel. I need to survive. You are still desperately looking for a movie ending where the good guy gets the girl. This is reality. Grow up." Chapter 11. The Breach. The piercing alarm bells abruptly shattered the evening quiet. Raiders, completely flanked by a horrific horde of chained Zeeks they used as savage war dogs, violently breached the southern perimeter. Absolute chaos erupted. Bright fire illuminated the screaming, smoke-filled sky. I did not freeze this time. I moved with the pure, unadulterated lethal instinct Clyde had beaten into my bones. I drew my heavy crossbow, dropped a massive charging Zeke with a bolt perfectly through its rotting eye, drew my machete, and ruthlessly hacked down a heavily armored raider to save a terrified, screaming child huddled helplessly by the shattered water barrels. Breathless, covered head to toe in black, viscous ichor, I looked across the burning courtyard to Alejandra for a nod, a sign of approval. Anything. She was already kneeling at Cap's side, frantically handing him heavy ammunition for his anti-materiel rifle, her back turned to me entirely, completely and utterly oblivious to my existence or my heroics. Chapter 12. The Dismissal and Mockery. After the brutal, exhausting fight, the courtyard was a gruesome mess of thick smoke and torn bodies. I was heavily covered in grime, ash, and blood. I tentatively approached her as she was meticulously wiping down her bloody blades. "We made a good team out there," I offered tentatively, hoping for a sliver of connection. She did not even look up from her knife. "Cap's heavy fire team made the difference," she corrected sharply and coldly. "You were just running around in the way of the crossfire. You are incredibly lucky you did not get shot by our own snipers." That night, entirely unable to sleep, I offered to take her night watch shift on the freezing wall so she could rest her injured arm. "I do not trust anyone but the regular, proven veterans on the wall." She dismissed me instantly without a second thought. "Go back to your tent, Joel." "You look tired." Walking back through the camp, I passed the dark supply shed and froze. I heard hushed voices. "He is like a pathetic, sad little lost puppy following you around." Cap's voice sneered with cruel amusement. "I know," Alejandra replied, her voice dripping with profound exhaustion and deep contempt. "It is utterly exhausting. I feel like I have to babysit him just because I made the catastrophic mistake of knowing him when I was 16. I genuinely wish he would just leave." Chapter 13. The Awakening. I walked numbly to the absolute edge of the camp where the large communal fire burned fiercely against the dark night. I slowly reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the crinkled plastic sleeve. I looked at the photograph of the two smiling, innocent teenagers. I looked at the beautiful girl in the yellow sundress. She was dead. Alejandra was entirely right about that one specific thing. With a remarkably steady hand, I dropped the precious photo into the roaring, hungry flames. I watched the plastic violently melt and curl, watched my younger, tragically naive self burn away into gray, floating ash. And for the very first time since the world ended 7 years ago, I did not feel sad. I did not feel heartbroken. I felt utterly, beautifully, completely foolish. I was finally, truly free. Chapter 14. The Final Plea and the Heroics. The next morning the sky was a bruised purple. I confronted her by the armory doors. "Do you actually love him, Cap?" I asked, my voice finally completely devoid of any trembling hope or desperation. She looked at me, visibly perplexed by my sudden chillingly calm tone. "I love that he keeps this fragile colony alive," she stated, with brutal, cold practicality. "That is what love is now. Utility. Brutal survival. What do you provide, Joel? What is your actual utility?" Before I could answer her transactional question, the very earth violently shook. A massive fecundary raid had hit, this time unleashing a giant, horrific mutated hive mind Zeke, a towering, grotesque monstrosity of fused flesh and jagged bone that effortlessly smashed through the main reinforced steel gate like it was wet tissue paper. Cap's elite men scattered in absolute, unbridled terror. Cap himself dropped his heavy rifle, turned his back, and cowardly ran for the inner keep. The massive beast roared, preparing to slaughter the entire collapsed defensive line. I did not think. I simply reacted. I aggressively sprinted toward the towering industrial crane overlooking the ruined gate. I grabbed the heavy rusted loading chains, swung out over the terrifying chaos like a madman, and dropped directly onto the beast's massive, humped back. I drove my steel machete deep into its exposed, glowing spinal cluster, commanding the chaos, violently twisting the heavy blade until the giant monstrosity screamed and collapsed in a thunderous, dust-choking heap of twitching limbs. I broke the back of the massive assault single-handedly. I saved the colony. I saved her. Chapter 15. The Cold Truth. As the choking, thick gray dust slowly settled, the ruined courtyard was dead silent. Alejandra slowly walked up to me, gingerly stepping over the massive, bleeding corpse of the monstrosity. She looked up at me with wide, completely different eyes. There was a sudden, desperate glimmer of the old Alejandra, mixed with something terrifyingly new and ravenous. "Joel," she breathed out, her chest heavily heaving. That was incredible. I did not know you had that kind of explosive power in you. Maybe we can go sit down in my private quarters? Talk about us?" I looked at her. I really looked at her, without the blinding filter of 7 years of desperate, lonely fantasy. I saw the raw, naked calculation in her shifting eyes. Now that I was deemed useful, now that I had violently proven myself a hero, and a clearly superior asset to the cowardly Cap, suddenly I was actually worth her precious time. Suddenly I was a high-value commodity she desperately wanted to acquire. "No," I said flatly, my voice like ice. "No?" She blinked, stumbling back slightly, genuinely shocked and profoundly confused by the rejection. "I did not do this for you, Alejandra." I casually wiped the thick black blood from my bruised cheek. I did it because it was the fundamentally right thing to do. I did it to actively protect the innocent people who could not protect themselves. There is a massive, fundamental difference between doing what is morally right and doing horrible things just to selfishly survive. You would not understand. Chapter 16. The Departure and the New Dawn. I walked straight to my small tent, packed my weathered canvas bag, and slung my heavy crossbow over my broad shoulder. Boy, my massively scarred mastiff, sat loyally by my side, his heavy tail thumping rhythmically against the packed dirt. Alejandra frantically followed me to the rusted gate, her voice trembling slightly, entirely losing her meticulously crafted cool facade. "Where are you going?" she pleaded, desperately reaching for my arm. "You can stay here. You can be a powerful leader. With me." We could completely run this place, Joel. I smoothly stepped out of her grasping reach. I spent 7 long, agonizing years trapped in a dark concrete box, dreaming of a beautiful girl who does not actually exist, I said, looking her dead in her cold eyes. And I just spent 3 agonizing weeks being repeatedly rejected and publicly humiliated by a cynical, incredibly empty woman I have finally realized I do not particularly like. I turned my back and walked straight out of the rusted gates without looking back. I woke up the next morning on a high, rocky ridge, overlooking the vast, glittering, beautiful expanse of the ocean. The sun was rising, a fierce, unapologetic, brilliant gold that bathed the ruined world in stunning, breathtaking beauty. For the very first time in my entire life, the suffocating heavy weight in my chest was completely gone. I was not Joel the lovable loser anymore. I was not Joel the hopeless romantic. I was just Joel, a hardened survivor, a fiercely independent man. I looked over at my true chosen family. Clyde had tracked me down to make sure I had not let the arrogant coastal snobs kill me. And Minnow was currently laughing wildly as she playfully tried to teach Boy how to hunt glowing blue butterflies in the tall, swaying grass. "You look completely different, kid," Clyde grunted, biting off a tough piece of dried venison. "Lighter, like you dropped 100 pounds of entirely useless gear." "The fog finally cleared, Clyde," I said, smiling a genuine bright smile as I checked the immense tension on my crossbow string. I realized I was desperately chasing a dead ghost while the whole wide, incredible world was just waiting to be explored. We did not head back to the dark holes in the ground. We confidently headed north, into the wild, untamed, dangerous frontier. We became a formidable, legendary nomadic unit, clearing out infested Zeke nests, mapping the beautiful, deadly new world, and living strictly by a very simple, unbreakable code. Value those who genuinely value you. Completely ignore the rest. I completely stopped seeking desperate validation in the cold, transactional eyes of others, and finally found it in the rough, earned calluses on my own hands and the steady, unbreakable beat of my own heart. I was red-pilled by the harsh, unapologetic reality of the apocalypse. I finally saw the world for the harsh, brutal, stunningly beautiful, and utterly unsentimental thing it truly was, and I was going to conquer it. Chapter 17. The Epilogue. 6 brutal months later, the coastal colony was struggling miserably under the weight of winter. Cap had predictably abandoned them, cowardly running off with half their vital supplies when the deep freeze hit and the local raider factions had picked their defenses terribly thin. Alejandra sat entirely alone on the very edge of the cold, unforgiving concrete seawall, dangling her legs over the crashing, violent gray waves. It was the exact same desolate place I had tried to give her the wooden bird. She looked out at the completely empty, unforgiving horizon. She had absolutely everything she thought she wanted: utility, ruthless pragmatism, and status among hardened survivors. But when the terrible winter fever violently hit her, or when the endless, freezing nights got far too cold and quiet, there was no one there to warmly stir the soup for her. There was no one to obsessively fix the broken radio just to hear a friendly, comforting voice in the suffocating dark. There was no one, absolutely no one, who would ever walk 85 miles through a literal, blood-soaked hellscape just to see her smile. She realized, with a crushing, profoundly suffocating despair, that she had not actually been hardened by the apocalypse. She had merely been completely emptied by it. She had willingly, foolishly traded her humanity and her soul for a cold tactical shield, and now she was perfectly shielded, but utterly, devastatingly alone. She looked back toward the quiet courtyard, at the gray, forgotten ashes of the fire pit where I had burned our photograph, wishing desperately that she could sift through the cold dirt and find even a tiny, charred scrap of the loving boy she had so cruelly and casually thrown away. But I was long gone. I was out there, dancing joyfully with the terrifying monsters in the bright golden sunlight, 1,000 miles away from the tragic, empty girl who realized entirely too late that true survival strictly requires having a heart that is actually worth saving.